Most recently, we've been looking at central angles and inscribed angles, and in lesson 10.5, we'll be examining other relationships in circles. Here we have a chord and a tangent that's going to have the measure equal to half of the intercepted arc. And if you recall, that's the same relationship we have with an inscribed angle. It's not an inscribed angle, but it's the same idea. So I gave a random measurement for ADB, and I said it's going to be 270 degrees. So if we know that the measure is equal to half of the intercepted arc, the measure of angle ABC is equal to what? Hopefully you got 135 degrees. I'm going to put 3 other examples up. Given these arc or angle measures, see if you can solve, for example, A, B, and C. And I would pause the recording. So hopefully you got that angle 1 came out to 105 degrees. For example, B, arc RST was 196, and arc XY for letter C was 160. So yesterday we talked about inscribed angles, so our lines can intersect on the circle. Today we're going to be looking at examples when the lines intersect inside the circle. They could intersect at the center, but today we're not looking at intersections at the center. And our third example is when they intersect outside of the circle. Here we have chords that intersect inside the circle, and remember they don't intersect at the center in this example. So if that's true, the 2 intersecting chords are equal to half the sum of the intercepted arcs. So this is pretty much the equation that we would use, or you could think of it as 1/2 arc plus arc. And now we'll put in some number values in practice. If we are trying to find the measure of angle 1, we just say 1/2 140 plus 80, and you should end up getting 110 degrees. But now let's look at one where we know the angle, but we don't know the arc. So I'm using the same values, but I left out this arc measure. So you would just put your angle measure, 110 degrees, on one side of the equal sign, 1/2, and then our arc measure, 140 plus x. We could multiply both sides by 2, so we end up getting 220 equals 140 plus x, and then subtract 140 from both sides. Now we have an angle formed by secants or tangents, and the vertex is outside of the circle. So the measure is equal to half the difference of the intercepted arcs. So imagine the measure of BD is 90 degrees, EF is going to be 20 degrees, and we want to find angle 1. So just as on the previous slide, we could think of it as 1/2 arc minus arc. So we would simply say 1/2 90 minus 20, and then finish our calculations. So we'll squeeze in 1/2. 90 minus 20 is 70, and 1/2 of 70 is 35 degrees. Again, it could be that we're missing one of our arc measures, so let's take a quick look at that. Okay, so here we fill in the values that we know. We know the measure of the angle is 35 degrees. We know our large arc is 90 degrees, and 1/2 is from our equation here. So again, we would multiply both sides by 2, so we'd end up getting 70 equals 90 minus x. subtract 90 from both sides, and then we'd have to multiply by a negative or divide by a negative. Okay, on the next slide, we'll look at a summary of our arc relationships and angle relationships. All right, we're going to start off with an angle that's equal to the arc, and that's going to be our central angle. And remember, that would look something like this. Half the sum is something we talked about today. That would be two intersecting chords. And we can draw that something like the next one, half the arc. So the next one has two answers formed by a chord and a tangent, and I illustrated it on the large circle, or an inscribed angle, and I did that up top to try to make it less confusing. And then our last one is half the distance, or excuse me, half the difference, and it's formed by secants or tangents with vertex outside the circle. So hopefully you can read this down at the bottom, formed by secants or tangents with vertex outside of the circle. Now we have two practice slides and also a quiz practice slide. So I would pause the recording, and then the answers, I'll have them come up in a little bit so you can double check your answers, and then we'll go over them next time we meet. Okay, here are the answers for 1 and 2. And we'll go on to the next slide, and then pause the recording. Okay, so on the previous slide for number 2, we added our two arcs and then multiplied by 1/2. So in this example, you're actually subtracting 78 minus 42 and multiplying by 1/2, and hopefully you got this answer. All right, pause the recording again, try these, and then we'll make sure we go over this before you take your quiz. That's it. Do your best on your homework, and again, we'll go over lesson 10.4 and 10.5 prior to taking the quiz.